stimulate you and attract your attention, and we will have a lively, vivid discussion. We have actually 1.5 hours almost. I don't think our Q&A session presentation will take that long, so please feel free to jump in and ask questions, to give difficult time to our speaker. all fine. My name is Sinan Gökçen. I'm from Civil Rights Defenders. I work as the Turkey Program Officer. I'm based in Istanbul, but I've been involved in Roma rights issues quite a long time, since 2005. I worked at the ERRC for an extended period, like 8-9 years, and then I shifted to Civil Rights Defenders, not based on a better offer, but for mostly personal reasons. And tomorrow, as you may know, tomorrow morning we will have a session on Turkey. Our two colleagues will talk about the Roma rights movement in general and the role of women within the Roma rights movement in Turkey. So we also expect you to attend and listen to this interesting discussion. It's a privilege to be here again, and thanks to Sarah and our colleagues in the field organizing this event. It's very nice to see old friends and to meet new friends. And slowly we can shift to our panel discussion, and it is entitled as Ensuring Effective Use of the EU Funds for the Roma Inclusion. This is a topic that affects Roma NGOs and Roma communities, because we are talking about money. In most cases, the governments use the excuse of lack of funds, lack of resources, blah, blah, to not to do something. Yes, they are right. Certain rights are expensive to access, like, housing, education. These are expensive rights. There are some free rights, like to be free from torture is a very free right. You don't need to spend any money not to torture or not to subject them to genocide or whatever. These are free rights. But in most cases, when we talk about Roma, most of the rights need resources, for sure. What I understand, based on my discussions with my old friend Andor, actually there are tons of monies out there at the EU. Some are funds for general purpose, which can also be used for Roma, but some of the funds are dedicated only for improving the life of Roma. And today we will discuss, and your contribution from the field is very crucial in that respect, how these funds are being used by governments. And as a spoiler, I will I will tell that you will probably know or be interested in hearing that in some cases governments do not even apply to funds for Roma. They don't use, etc. But we will come to such things. Before that, I want to introduce our speaker, Andor, to you. Andor is originally from Hungary, so he's a passport holder of Hungary, as he describes himself, because he doesn't want to identify himself with Orban regime. He served in public sector for a long time in Hungary, in ministries. Then we met him when I was at the ERRC, and then he moved to European Commission, and he also took several roles within the Commission. And very recently, actually, a year ago almost, he stopped his career in public servant, and he established an NGO called Bridge EU, and dealing with this EU funds and so on and so forth, other issues as well. But by profession, he's a medical doctor. So if there's an emergency, we have a doctor here who can immediately assist you. So let's start this way. Just out of curiosity, I typed on Google like misuse of EU funds, nothing else, just this one. And you will be shocked how many results you will receive in 10 seconds. And almost every single EU country's name is listed. Abuse investigation in Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, France, every country, we have this problem. And there are different categories of misuse, corruption, this and that, blah, blah, but almost no European Union country is an accession country, of course, is immune from this misuse concept. Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Bulgaria, as I understand, are fighting for the first place in misuse categories. Romania is also very, very good. For example, a couple of months ago, please correct me, my Hungarian friends, EU is considering suspension of 7.5 billion euros structural funds to Hungary due to misuse of the funds. So we are talking about the 7.5 billion euro for Hungary, such a small country, like, you know, huge money. You can rebuild almost the whole Hungary. Like, we are talking about a lot of money here. I think recently, in the beginning of this year, Parliament adopted a set of recommendations to EU structures and the governments, suggesting a more effective way of investigating, monitoring, etc. So the EU funds, because EU fund is our money. I mean, not my money because I'm not an EU citizen, but EU funds are coming from EU citizens' tax money. So it's public money. So it should be used properly and monitored properly, right? So let's begin with that question, Andor, if you allow me. Yeah. First of all, can you give us a general picture of EU funds for both EU member countries as well as accession countries, on what types, general amounts, this and that, whatever, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Shannon, for a very nice introduction, and I like very much actually that you immediately actually went to the misuse of funds as, let's say, our hook actually to see what's really happening with the funds, because I think this is one of the most important questions what we need to understand, that even if the money is available, why is not properly used and why is not targeting, let's say, more efficiently Roma, and let's say the funds are not contributing more efficiently to Roma integration, because that's a fact. There are several studies, monitoring reports which are already actually available, and they are all saying that actually the EU funds are not contributing too much to the Roma integration. Let me give you a very simple, let's say, economic explanation. In Eastern Europe, all the countries like Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, economically they are growing. So if you see the last 10, 15 years, these countries, they became much richer than before. So the GDP per capita is growing quite significantly. Even if they are complaining, it's not true, they're doing quite well. What is the problem in these countries? The inequalities are growing. So it means that even if the economic development is quite good, unfortunately, Roma and other marginalized groups, they are not necessarily benefiting from this economic development. And here is the problem. When it comes to the inequalities, when it comes to the gaps in the society, the EU fund should primarily focus actually reducing these inequalities. This is the basic aim of the EU funds. Why it's not happening? That's what we need to explore more, and that's what we probably need to discuss, and your opinion would be very helpful for me to understand that. How do you see it in the field? Because we have, of course, as I used to work for the European Commission, we have plenty of, I don't know, again, reports, studies, and conferences where this question was discussed. I wouldn't say that actually there's a kind of clear-cut explanation, actually, what's really happening, why the inequalities are not, let's say, reduced by using the EU funds. I prepared a presentation, so if you don't mind, maybe you can launch my presentation, and I will go through some questions actually in this regard. So when you are asking actually what's happening with the EU funds and how the whole EU funds structure is working, then I will go back to this question, because what is the European Union, how the EU funds are working? You see actually in the slides that this will be part of this workshop today. And also I would like to go back to some very practical issues, actually how to put together an application for EU funds. Why? Because there are, again, lots of discussions actually about that Roma NGOs, they are not benefiting from the EU funds properly. What is the main problem? The problem is the institutional racism, let's put it in this way, that money is not necessarily allocated actually for Roma integration, or there is a capacity issue, like the Roma NGOs, they are not able to apply for funding, or both. That could be a very interesting discussion actually now, to understand that where we should improve, let's say, our efforts, and as Sinan said, actually, let's say the misuse of EU funds, how it can be tackled, what we can do, like how to submit complaints, litigations, what we can do when we see some serious human rights violations in the scope of EU funds. Maybe we can start with that. So can you give me actually some examples where you have seen already actually human rights violations in the scope of EU funds programs or projects? Can you give me some examples? What do you think, what is the human rights violations potential when it comes to the EU funds use, in your country, of course? Is there anybody who can give us examples?
I can give one.
I was absolutely sure about that. Go ahead, please. If there is nobody? No, here we go. Can we give, yeah.
Sarah.
Daniel, here.
So like you can see evaluation of human rights and also like how in one application there are can be open to Roma NGOs,
Yeah.
but then in the same application there are also international NGOs
Yeah.
applying for that call. So we as a Roma organization, we don't have the same capacities
Here we go.
as international NGOs.
Here we go.
So like on the run, we are not equal.
Very good.
So like, and there are the international NGOs, let's say, they are more likely to get approved to those funds than the Roma NGOs.
Okay,
You
thank
know?
you very much. Yeah.
So that's a discrimination on that level.
Good.
Start with that.
Thank you very much. That's a good example, actually. Let me come back to this question later. Sinan, do you want to give?
Can I add something to my
Sure,
colleagues?
go ahead, yeah.
In Turkey, for example, this is something I witnessed in person. There was a big call under IPA for Roma
yeah.
funding, and then there was a signatory ceremony for those who won the
Yeah.
funds. And we are talking about quite large funds for Roma NGOs.
Yeah.
And I know many of them. I said, look, what's your project? They say, we don't know. There's a company.
Oh, yeah.
They are following the calls. They are calling us. They are saying that we are going to prepare an application for you,
Yeah.
and we get 30% of the funds, 40% of the funds.
Yeah.
So Roma NGOs are getting funds through a company, but they don't even know what the project is about.
Yeah.
And the company is mostly using the money for meetings in five-star hotels, in resort areas.
Like today, you mean?
Inviting people from abroad, this and that, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So no contribution to
Yeah.
the community through that particular fund.
Absolutely. No, I think this is also a very important question. But I would like to ask you to focus more on the human rights regulations. So when it comes to the capacities, that's an absolutely important question, Daniel, what you mentioned. But when it comes to the human rights regulations, like the Race Directive, like the Charter of Fundamental Rights, how do you see that these regulatory provisions are violated when it comes to the EU funds? Bernard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple of points where EU funds
Yeah.
have actually been used to support segregated schools.
Here we go.
Where in Italy, funds have been used to maintain
Yeah.
camps, which again runs counter to when I
Yeah.
questioned officials why they weren't chasing the money.
Yeah.
They said, how can you chase the money in Italy? When I asked about, there were a number of cases where
Yeah.
we produced research to show that housing situation of Roma in Italy constitutes a breach of the Race Equality Directive. This wasn't. So the combination of funds being used for purposes that run directly counter to the Race Equality Directive, run counter to the treaties. And in fairness, the Commission has done much to make funding opportunities available, making funding, structural funds only available to national governments blocks the capacity of cities to apply independently, especially where there's been state capture, as in Hungary. If the city of Budapest was able to work in partnership with local civic organizations, because to manage funds is extremely difficult. The EU has earned scientifically proven study to show that its communications are incomprehensible.
Absolutely.
So
It's true.
there is an obligation for the European Union to be able to communicate to citizens from member states and accession countries in a language they understand.
Yeah.
So the study has shown that nobody understands what the EU is talking about.
Yeah.
So its communication needs to be, but in terms of rights abuses and the use of EU funds, we've seen where regenerate a town or a village, and the regeneration stops directly where the Roma streets start. And you have done a lot, you probably mentioned it later, I don't want to be a spoiler, but on conditionality.
Yes.
That when EU funds are
Yeah.
made to a municipality, made to a town, that the conditionality of Roma inclusion, of non-racist policies should be set in stone. And I'd be curious to hear how that has progressed over the years. Main point is the fault lies not with the European Commission, it lies with the member states.
Yeah. Good. On the gentleman, please. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Okay, so maybe just a quote next to your sentences, because of course we are talking now about Roma integration and about funds of the Romani people, but I would like to highlight, I think it's important to talk about the other minorities also,
Yeah.
other minority rights violations in Hungary, because this is not only, so if there is a kind of treaty or misuse of or actually not channeling the EU funds to the country, there is also not only focusing on the Roma rights violations, but for example in Hungary, one of the biggest case is the rule of law violations for different minorities like LGBTI and also gender violations. And that's why, for example, now Hungary, so basically Hungary, they just cut the gender recognition and also the, let's say gender recognition, and also they didn't recognize the transgender identities, so they just froze them applications to change their sex and names. And because there is this kind of case now that they wanna block the EU funds, they start to approve and they start to give kind of legal documents for the transgender people that they can apply now for them name and changing their sex as well. So this is, I think it's also, and of course school segregation and so on and so on, but that is, maybe I'm naive, but in case of Hungarian government, that is just still a minor issue, the school segregation. Of course, for us it's the huge issue, but for them it's just, you know, kind of dot in the agenda, because they're violating like other rights as well, and actually the different EU commissions, they also focusing on that.
Absolutely.
So, and yeah, so Romani issues just one point of that one. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Andor, before we move,
Sure.
can you give a bit more description on this human rights conditionality? Maybe
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
everybody is very familiar.
Yeah, there was one more question, but
Okay.
yeah. Please go ahead with the question, yeah.
Dëgjova shumë
I heard a lot.
Possible organizations so that we get familiar with the framework.
I'm an activist from the Roma community, organization TREA, called TREA. I heard a lot being said here, but there was no mention of funds being allocated for training or synthesizing parents not to allow their children to go into early marriages, because we want our children to be somebody, to study. Maybe out of 100, 2 students will be able to achieve their life goals. But there should be, not just to be discussed here, but such projects to be supported with funding, to work with parents of these children and to work with the children, because this is the vicious cycle of early age marriages, lack of education, lack of employment, and then this is the Roma community, the stereotype of the Roma community, which enables this vicious cycle of the Roma being outside of society because of this reason. And this is something which is very concerning for me. So we need to work more closely with the community to have an effect on preventing these early marriages or
of how to spend money. So when we get rid of misuse of funds, then we can come to
Exactly,
real areas
Yeah.
of expenditure. So
Yeah.
can you, like, maybe not everybody is very familiar with
No, of
all the
course.
discussions and
Yeah.
outcome, because I know that at the EU level, NGOs try to push this
Yeah.
human rights conditionality for all EU funds,
Absolutely.
not only for Roma related.
Absolutely.
So what we mean by human rights conditionality?
Yeah. Basically, when member states they are preparing the so-called EU funds programs, and it concerns also the member states, it concerns also the accession countries, and even the neighborhood programs. So all countries who are probably sitting here today, they have to consider the human rights conditionalities in that regard, that they have to follow very closely the requirements of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the Race Directive, and or any other let's say, anti-discrimination legislation. What does that mean in practice? In practice, it means that when they are preparing the programs, they have to justify that they are in line actually with these regulations. If they are not justifying it, the European Commission has the right not to approve the EU funds program. So simply saying, guys, it's not ready yet, sending back, work more on that, okay?
So EU basically says that you cannot violate human rights with my money.
You cannot violate, but it's even more, because you have to put some safeguards, some mechanism, some justifications how you will not violate actually the human rights regulations. So it's not enough to say that I promise, that it's a pinky promise that I will not do it. It's not enough.
So, for example, how can Italy build and maintain camps despite this regulation? I've been in the camps. Actually, we visited Isabella from the early session. We prepared the report on the camps. I mean, it's horrifying. Like,
it's true.
People are living in miserable conditions for an extended period with no hope for the future, and this is done by EU money. Like
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, just following actually your comments, actually this is happening not only in the Roma business, but as I work very closely with organizations who are dealing with disability. Like children with disabilities, they are facing exactly the same problems with the EU funds as, let's say, the Roma issues when it comes to the school segregation, camps and everything. Why is it happening? It's happening simply because there are two levels of, let's say, the EU funds programs or EU funds implementation. One is the program, which is developed actually by the member states. And when it comes to the implementation, we are talking about the call for proposals and the projects. And most of the problems are happening at the level of the call for proposals and, let's say, the project implementation, which the European Commission does not see. Because the European Commission, people who are sitting in Brussels, they are more looking at the programs because they cannot check simply, let's say, 40,000 projects which is implemented, for example, in Poland in 1 year. They cannot. So what's happening? Actually, these projects, when they are violating, let's say, the human rights, should be reported to the European Commission, and then the European Commission will have the right, will have the, let's say, the competence to act. And this is the difficulty what we are facing, because otherwise the European Commission will not be informed actually about this project. In the program, and I would like to highlight it very much because this is the most important problem. In the program, everything is nice, everything is clear, everything is well done, and the human rights safeguards are very well included actually in the programs. When it comes to the implementation, it's all gone. And the implementation is like building segregated schools, or in Hungary, Bernard probably know this case, there was a sports center which was built by EU funds, and Roma kids, they were not allowed to go there. And there are plenty of other cases where we see these huge problems actually with the human rights violation. That's why we are encouraging colleagues who are working in the civil society to report. And that's why probably some of you know, I was holding actually some trainings actually for civil society, how to submit complaints and what to do actually with this complaints mechanism. How does it work and what you should request actually from the European Commission to act. And actually I have to tell you that there is one success story because we need to be a little bit positive. In Hungary, in Nyíregyháza, there's a city on the north of Hungary. There is a case where actually the local municipality wanted to merge two Roma settlements, two Roma ghettos, with the use of EU funds. Some of the good activists, they reported actually this case to the European Commission, and the European Commission decided to suspend the payments. So there's no money for this project anymore, okay? And it's a quite significant amount of money, it's around 200 million euros. So this money is gone simply because actually the discrimination was justified, right? But I have to tell you at the other side, let's say the gloomy part of this story, this is only one case, which I know. There is no other cases. And we know very well that this is happening in all Eastern European countries and in all accession countries. Ghettos are kind of growing simply because of the use of EU funds. Segregated schools are built, and in many cases, Roma, they are simply not allowed to use facilities which are built by EU funds. This is unacceptable.
This conditionality, human rights conditionality is applied to accession funds as well, right?
Absolutely.
It's not only for structural funds.
Absolutely. That's very important to highlight. Thank you very much, Sinan, for the question. That the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the Race Directive, let's just give you these two examples, it applies everywhere. It applies everywhere. Regardless what people are saying, it applies everywhere. Okay? So you have the full right to ask questions. How much this particular, let's say, program or project is in line with the Race Directive? You should ask this question because there is no excuse not to be in line with the Race Directive because it's the European directive. It applies everywhere, right?
We have an interaction from the
Sure.
Thank you, Dragan from Bosnia. Just a short question. What do you think, why we don't have more reports on such projects? Do you think that people are afraid to report? The governments get blacklisted or NGOs get listed or whole country gets blacklisted from the EU?
Yeah.
Or is it just that we are not paying attention what is going on in the neighbor's backyard?
I think both. My experience shows that both. We just started actually to put together a project. If you have time, I can give you a bit more details actually about this, to collect the misuse of EU funds examples in different countries. So we would like to make a report and then to figure out actually what to do next. And my experience shows that some of the organizations, even if they are working on the field and so on, they are simply not following what's happening with the EU funds in some countries. This is a bit sad. And it could be because of the lack of capacity, they don't know actually how to do it, or they are busy with other things. That's absolutely fine. Just, I will not name any country because it's not nice actually naming and shaming in this way, but there are countries where actually the civil society is not following too much what's happening with the EU funds. And to be very funny, for example, in Hungary, the civil society is very strong. I know it more because simply I'm strong in that regard that they are following very closely what's happening with the EU funds, and that is why we have this example of this housing segregation stuff in Hungary. And we are working on getting examples from Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, because absolutely sure that it's the same is happening.
I have a question in that respect.
Yeah,
is it possible, for example, to develop a template for NGOs across Europe?
Yeah.
Because it provides them a methodology, like how to report questions, blah, 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 whatever, like, I don't know how to develop it, but maybe you can do it and circulate to all NGOs. Like
he's a smart man, and I knew it before, but I mean, we developed it already, actually. And that's how we would like to collect these examples. Exactly, in the 5 countries like Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, that's how we would like to collect examples. There's a template, and simply you have to follow actually these questions. Where do you see the human rights violation? Actually, how you would like to report it. It has been already reported. And there is one more important question, and I would like to invite you actually to consider this one. Please consider actually to working with the equal treatment bodies or any other human rights institutions in your country. So you're not alone, especially when it comes to the accession procedure. Actually, the European Commission is putting quite a lot of importance actually on this kind of human rights institution, the capacity of human rights institutions, ombudsman, equal treatment body, and whoever else. Please try to work with them as much as possible because they will help you to justify the existence of the human rights violation. Because this is a big debate at the level of the European Commission, whether the human rights violation is justified or not. And the example of school segregation is a very clear one. In some cases, the European officials, they are saying that, let's say, improving of the quality of teaching in a segregated school, it should be okay. So it's not a violation of human rights because we are improving the quality of teaching. If you look at simply from the legal point of view, it's not true. You have to work on actually on the desegregation of these schools and to try to find a way that Roma children, they are having equal access to good quality schooling. And even if you are improving the quality of teaching in the school, it doesn't mean that the Roma kids, they have equal access to good quality schooling. It doesn't mean that. Because plenty of examples are showing that it's just an improvement of the teaching, but it's still not reaching, let's say, the national average. And that's a very difficult case. But the equal treatment body, the ombudsman, they can help you to justify this human rights violation. Daniel, please.
There's also a question online. Isabella, can you hear us?
Thank you. Can you see me, hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Hello. It's so nice to see you there. And also hello to my colleague Andor. It's good to see you made it there. I'm here in Brussels. Just to mention that we are working, and I am working closely with Andor on this misuse of funds. But I wonder, and of course, we have had discussion.
We don't hear you, Isabella. You disappeared. It's very sad.
Isabella, we don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Hello?
Yes, now good.
Okay, it's just that then it's such a big echo with the headphones. Let me try and put this lower, the volume. Okay. You can still hear me, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry for this. So I was wondering, Andor, if you can comment more on this need to have in place particular safeguards or guidelines that would help those that are designing both the operational programs, but also particularly the calls for proposals of how to go about human rights, and particularly how not to violate human rights or fundamental rights. And as you know, in the previous programming period, the Commission, and even before that, since 2015, the Commission has put forward guidelines on segregation, which I feel should have been quite useful for the member states on how to avoid creating calls that would be discriminatory just per se, not in the implementation. And so do you know, or can you comment on the need of having such particular guidelines also in this programming period? And what can we do also more on the other side of capacitating the monitoring committees and even the national Roma contact points that are supposed to somehow be involved, at least in theory or according to the EU-Roma framework, in the development of the programs and also into the, of the calls potentially, or at least to be able to provide some feedback. And the second comment is just more, I guess, a comment, an invitation to everyone that is in the room to pay attention to one of the elements that you have mentioned, which is the role of the equality bodies. Very recently, the Commission has adopted new EU standards for the equality bodies. And with that, there is a process that will have to take place on national level to be able to align the mandate of the equality bodies according to this new EU regulation. And within that, we feel that it's really important that the equality bodies take a leading role when it comes to the monitoring of the use of funds from a fundamental rights perspective, and particularly from a discrimination perspective, which normally sits with them. So thank you so much, and Andor, if you can find a way to comment on everything that I have said. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now we can finish the session because Isabella said almost everything to be said. Thank you very much, Isabella, for your contribution.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank
Stay
you.
online for maybe further intervention. So good luck with the
No, it's fine. And the biggest problem is that I forgot to take a pen and I was not able, but okay, I remember all of your questions, Isabella, of course, I'm just joking. So I think it's a very good question, actually, how to look at actually the practical implementation of these human rights safeguards when it comes to the programs or the call for proposals. So what we are really expecting actually from member states, from accession countries or other countries actually when it comes to the human rights safeguards. So one is actually a mechanism how the different players at the national or even regional level or local levels, they are working together actually to ensure that the human rights regulations requirements are followed. Let me give you some examples. So in some countries, actually, some of the local authorities, together with the civil society, together with, I don't know, social care workers or whoever else, teachers, they are forming actually a little bit of networks to see actually how much, let's say, the human rights issues are, let's say, respected, and if not, they can report to the relevant bodies, which could be the equal treatment body or somebody else. That could be a very good example. Why not to make some local networks who are reporting actually the cases? The other one is at the level of the managing authority. I hope that everybody understands who is the managing authority, right? Do you know managing authority or the authority who is opening the call for proposals, right? It's clear. So the managing authority should involve actually in their work the equal treatment body, the ombudsman, and all the relevant players. So in a very practical terms, we are expecting that these guys are sitting in a monitoring committee meetings. I'm so sorry for this jargon, but if you are not following me, just let me know, and I will translate it actually to some normal human being language. But this is the way how we are. So the monitoring committee where people are sitting together, managing authority, equal treatment body, ombudsman should be there, and they should follow actually what's happening. And if the NGOs in the monitoring committee meeting are reporting that, look, we have an issue actually with school segregation, we have an issue actually of other type of discriminations, then the equal treatment body will respond, and this is in the minutes, so they have to deal with actually with these questions. So that's what we also expecting actually from member states, that these relevant stakeholders are sitting in these meetings, and there is a kind of follow-up of these mechanisms. Or let me give you one more example. If the European Commission would see that there are some loopholes actually in the human rights regulations, they can use the EU funds as a kind of leverage to say that if you want to use EU funds, it's great, but then you have to modify the human rights regulations in your country. Okay? Because we see some loopholes. We see that actually the different players are not working together well, or there are some other loopholes in the regulations. That's also happened actually in many cases. That's what we can expect, again, in the so-called strategic level. And it's a little bit abstract, little bit not too practical, but that's how it works. When it comes to the call for proposals, that's already actually the managing authority job, and the European Commission, again, it's very important to understand, does not see too much, does not really follow too much what's happening with the call for proposals. It's bad, I know, but we cannot expect actually from these guys, actually from Brussels, they are following all these little details. That's why we need a little bit more capacities to report these cases. Try to help me, Sinan, because Isabella, she was really very detailed, as usual. So, sorry?
The guidelines.
The guidelines, exactly. So when it comes to the guidelines, the European Commission always, in the 2014-20 period, I was part of this gang that time, we produced a lot of guidance for member states. And if you just open the websites, you will you can find all of these guidance, including what Isabella mentioned, the guidance on how to tackle segregation in education and housing. I have to tell you that I drafted actually this guidance, so it's not a secret. And actually for the 2021-27, which is the current programming period, it's updated. So we have a new one. But unfortunately, this new guidance is not public. Why? Because the member states, they requested that the European Commission should not publish actually these guidances. I think there was a reason why. Because member states, they didn't want this kind of transparency, that these guidances are available. So let's say you, as a civil society, you can report to the European Commission about the, let's say, the that member states are not following actually this guidance, because the guidance is not available, it's not existing.
This be challenged before the court?
Yes, we did it already. Actually, we did it, and together with Isabella, we did it. We already actually requested actually the publication of these documents. We do really hope that it will come very, very soon, because, and it's a completely another subject, but you have to also know that all the internal guidance documents of the European Commission should be published because of the Transparency Directive. There's a directive which is requiring that all internal documents should be published. If the European Commission decided not to make it public, that you, as a civil society, you have a right actually to request it. And even show you the website where you can do it. It's a 10 minutes work. And we already requested lots of documents actually from the Commission to make it public more in the disability field, but the Roma is coming now.
Or we can call it public leaks, and somebody can hack the EU something database and make them public.
Would be, yeah, just then we will sit in the courtroom for years actually because of that. But no, we will get it actually soon. I do really hope that we will get it soon, and then everybody can use it again in all aspects, which is the EU funds for member states, IPA funds for the accession countries, and all of these things. And the reason is, just please don't forget, because it's all based on the Race Directive and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So,
before I forget, you mentioned that you developed these templates to report misuse. How our colleagues can reach these documents?
I'm happy to share it with you. It's not a problem at all. Yeah. We've developed it actually for ourselves because we would like to run a project actually around this, but I'm absolutely, because it's not a secret, I would be very happy if we can, let's say, identify more and more examples, because that will help, that will make a kind of pressure on the decision makers that, look guys, these are evidences, facts, that things are not going very well.
I know that there are several levels of misuse of EU funds, and maybe the top one is the corruption, like, somebody taking the money into pocket. Are there any criminal charges on any public official or whatever NGO based on this misuse?
Oh, now you're asking very difficult questions. It's not what we discussed, no? Okay, with the corruption, so let's make something very clear. There is one big issue about the human rights violation, and there is another one, the corruption. That's how the EU funds, people, they are calling it the financial irregularities, and I cannot even pronounce it, but it doesn't matter. But these are two very different issues, and the regulations behind this are two very different things. We are more focusing on the human rights violation stuff, because that's more important, I suppose, for us. But at the same time, actually, the corruption is a very, very big issue. And to be honest, the European Commission is more focusing on the corruption things than in the human rights violation. Why? That's also a very difficult discussion, probably because it's easier, because the financial regulations are, let's say, more understandable for people. So it's more close to people that people are cheating, they are stealing money. The human rights violation issues, as I tried to give an example about the school segregation, is not so close to people, so they don't really necessarily understand it. Why is it a problem that Roma kids are in the separated school? Is it a problem, really?
It's less justifiable, corruption.
Less justify, exactly.
Segregated education, you can justify
exactly.
the majority.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to the public officials, maybe Isabella, she can give us actual examples, because that's what I remember, that in Romania there were some cases, but there are some huge investigations also in Hungary and in Czech Republic. In Czech Republic, the Commission suspended the whole health infrastructure money which was used actually for building hospitals and everything. It was completely suspended a couple of years ago simply because of the corruption. Yeah. So there are cases, of course, and much more, let's say, available cases than in the human rights field. So that's why we need to work more on the human rights things. Yeah.
Any questions or intervention or comment or contribution or whatever you name it so far from audience? No.
Sinan, can I just show 2 or 3 slides about the complaints? Because then it will can I ask the gentlemen? Yes, I mean, I will just simply jump to the complaints, if you don't mind, because then we can see, you see? So the complaints or litigation, what we can do, and I'm giving you actually some examples, what do we call by misuse of EU funds from the human rights point of view, okay? And I will give you this presentation, of course. So, because it would be very important to understand that how to identify the human rights violations when it comes to the misuse of EU funds. For example, the discriminative treatment. So again, it's important to understand that when you're building services, facilities, it should be available, should be accessible for everybody. But there are cases where actually children or adults from marginalized groups, they are not allowed to use actually these facilities. That's a very direct discrimination. When it comes to the reinforced education and housing segregation, which we discussed very briefly earlier, that's absolutely a very simple case of discrimination. Let's not forget that when we are talking about the Roma children, there is a huge problem actually over the institutionalization. And Bernard is sitting with us, which is great. He can give us actually more information, more, let's say, details about this, that how much Roma children are victims of institutionalization all over Central and Eastern Europe. This is discrimination. Even if the lawyers, they are not necessarily always admitting it, both at the European level or even national level. Unfortunately, we are having some cases where lawyers, they are saying that putting children in institutions, it's not, let's say, a discrimination. It's more actually about the good treatment of children. Children, we are talking about like deprived from parental care, so I mean orphans or children with disabilities. And in both cases, Roma are very much represented actually in this case. There is also a very important question actually about the lack of limited access to asylum procedures. When people, they are not allowed to submit asylum requests, or the pushbacks, or there is no accession to reception facilities and so on. And this is the case now with Ukraine and Roma. In the Central Eastern European countries. So when you see that actually the reception centers are built by EU funds or refurbished by EU funds, and the the Roma from Ukraine, they are not allowed to use these reception centers, which is the case, which I heard already actually in some countries. This is, again, something what we can report about, okay? Okay, there is one very important...
Before we go,
sorry.
A very simple example. Sorry. You know, Turkey and EU has an ugly deal regarding the refugees.
Yes.
So we are keeping them in Turkey, and then we are not sending them to EU zone.
Yeah.
So white people of EU are safe and happy. And Turkey is receiving billions of euros for this.
Yeah.
But there's a minor problem, which is DOM communities from Syria.
Yeah.
There are approximately 30,000 of them in Turkey, and they are triple, quadruple discriminated.
Yeah.
There are camps built by EU money, but these people are not let in the camps. And they, 2 years ago, we visited a refugee center in Kilis, a neighboring town to Syria. There were 2 camps next to each other. One is for Arab Syrians, all facilities, school, toilets, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a DOM camp, nothing.
Yeah.
And the Arab refugees do not allow DOM refugees to use the toilet infrastructure or schools, etc. And this is being done with EU money, like very simple. I mean,
absolutely.
A very, very clear and very strong example of how EU money is misused to strengthen the discrimination.
Absolutely.
In that case, yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. And maybe we can extend a little bit the scope of the discussion today, because I think it would be important that we are not just talking about the Roma, as you mentioned, but let's say we may bring actually, let's say, the discrimination of migrants, refugees actually into the scope. Why? Because that would help us a little bit actually to see the common, let's say, understanding of discrimination when it comes to different target groups, people with disabilities, migrants, Roma, homeless. And when it comes to the migrants and refugees, it's very interesting that probably colleagues, you remember actually in 2015, the Hungarian government built the transit zone between Hungary and Serbia, right? And it was very much challenged by the European Commission. There was a court case, and actually Hungary was requested actually to close down this transit zone in 2018 because of the European Court of Justice decision, right? Now, actually, very similar transit zones are built in 5 Greek islands. Completely similar transit zones. Lesbos, Samos, and I don't remember actually what the other names, but and it's all built actually by EU funds. So if we consider the transit zone as a discriminative service, then we have a huge issue now in Greece, actually using EU funds for transit zones, because actually these transit zones are used as detention centers, in very simple words, as jails for these people. Just wanted to remind you that actually these kind of issues and about the discrimination in the scope of EU funds is happening in all areas, not only with the Roma. And that would be also good to understand actually that we have a bigger scope just simply than, let's say, the Roma. Can we go back to the presentation for a second? Do you mind to put the presentation in? Yes, thank you. Just two more examples. Actually, one is the labor market integration. Please don't forget, when people are separated in the vocational trainings, like Roma and non-Roma, which is happening in many, many countries. One vocational training for Roma, the other one is for non-Roma. And usually the vocational training for Roma is much less quality than the other one. Then it's, again, something which we need to discuss about the discrimination. And the other one is, Bernard, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned actually about the urban regeneration issues. I don't know, somebody mentioned it. You mentioned it, right? So, in many Eastern European countries, actually, because of the urban regenerations, hundreds of Roma families are evicted as a consequence of urban regenerations, simply because the housing prices are going up. That's what we call gentrification. Yes. And that's not challenged, actually. That's really interesting that nobody is challenging in these countries, actually, these gentrification issues, as hundreds of Roma families are evicted as the consequence of EU funds programs. So we need to work on this. And very briefly, when we are talking about the complaints, these are, let's say, it's a very short overview, actually, that these are, let's say, the legal frameworks or policy frameworks, what you can use as arguments as the Racial Equality Directive, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, when it comes to the children with disabilities in institutions, or the Charter of Fundamental Rights, they are violated. And there are thousands of policy frameworks, so I will not go to the details. But what is important, that you can directly send and submit the complaints to the European Commission, okay? So it means that the European Commission has a very specific website where you can send your complaint, and the Commission has a very specific procedure how to follow it up, and you see actually that, let's say, what is the time schedule. Basically, in nutshell, I can tell you that in 1 year time, the European Commission has to finalize its decision whether this is a discrimination or not, okay? In 1 year time, which is quite good. If you go to the court, Bernard, maybe you can help us actually, how long does it take? Probably a bit more than 1 year. Here we go. So,
it took 40 years.
So yeah, so please use this instrument as much as you can do, because again, if you are sending more and more complaints to the Commission, these guys, they will understand that there is a problem actually, so we need to focus on discussion more. Yeah.
Great. At this moment, any contribution from the field? I mean, not field, but from the other side of the world. Like, okay.
Sorry, can I just...
Bernard, yeah.
Bernard, sorry.
Thanks. Just a practical, strategic question.
Yeah.
Rather than lots of NGOs submit discrete complaints,
yeah,
and oftentimes they'll be rejected because this complaint is ineligible, is there a way that NGOs can liaise with you
yeah,
to formulate the complaints in a way that they won't be ruled out,
yeah,
to give them at the outset to say whether this qualifies
yeah,
as a complaint? So beyond the templates, it would be perhaps more effective, and then to audit and keep an eye on if a complaint has gone in,
yeah,
12 months or up. Sometimes NGOs are so busy and we lodge so many complaints, we forget ourselves
yeah,
when the 12 months is up. So is there room for collaboration directly with you to ensure that the complaints are optimal?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you very much, Bernard, for these very practical questions, because I think it's important. Just to give you a very simple example, I did 2 rounds of trainings for NGOs in Greece because of these huge problems, actually, the pushbacks and no access to asylum and all of these things. And as a consequence, or as a result of these trainings, actually several complaints have been already submitted to DG Home. This is the particular body in the European Commission who is dealing with migration, and actually now more and more results are coming, looking at the questions actually about the detention centers and so on. Yes, and they did it together with these NGOs. Absolutely. And one particular suggestion can be made even now. Please, again, don't forget the role of the Equal Treatment Body or Ombudsman at the national level. So before even actually you are going for this complaint to the European Commission, please liaise with these human rights bodies and ask their opinion, because as soon as, let's say, the human rights violation is justified, the European Commission cannot deny it, cannot, because there is a very simple evidence. But when you are saying, as an NGO, that it's discrimination, they might say, but we don't agree. So you see the problem, right? Without evidences, it's a very difficult discussion. But as soon as you have the evidences from the human rights bodies, then it's very difficult to deny. Yeah, so please feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to help you as much as I can, of course.
Actually, I wanted to bring here a case of misuse of funds in the case of Albania, where a school became segregated school because there was a project going and helping for Roma children with food, and this is how the non-Roma children, they left the school, and the school became segregated because there was offered food for the Roma children. And this is how, in a way, the school became segregated, and it was discrimination. I mean, the European Court of Human Rights found discrimination and found it illegal, this segregation of these schools. So it's true that we need to be very careful how we use funds, because, okay, in one way we want to help those children, but also in the same time we have to be very careful how we are using and what we are causing with this money and this project that we are implementing. I'm talking here for the school of named Prishtina in Korcha, in my hometown, where the European Court of Human Rights found it like it is segregated, and they punished the Albanian government for the segregation of this school. And actually the project was a project. It started as a project from one organization in Albania, and then it continued like being supported also by the Directorate of Education in Albania. So, and then the school just became segregated. So we really need to be very careful about this. So I want to ask you, do you have like, how often the NGOs are brave to even complain to the European Commission? Because sometimes like NGOs are not willing to complain because they're like, we shouldn't, you know, like have this this relationship with the Commission because we are not going to have projects, and so how brave this sector is to complain.
Yeah, and I forgot to respond to this question because it was asked before. And it's a bit sensitive one, to be honest, because we are sitting here actually with friends and colleagues, but I personally kind of encountered this kind of problems actually before. Yes, some of the colleagues, they said, no, we don't want to ruin our relationship actually with the European institutions. That's true, but this is their decision, that's fine. If you don't want to do it, please don't. If you think that this will, let's say, ruin your relationship with the European Commission, then this is your decision. If you ask my personal opinion, it can be done in a very professional and polite way. So you should not ruin your relationship with this. Even if you are submitting a complaint or you go for, I don't know, any other, you're using any other legal instrument, it doesn't mean that you are, you consider actually the European Commission as an enemy. No, there's a mistake, there's a problem, but we need to solve together, right? So, I mean, if you're emphasizing this angle, that should work. But without naming and shaming again, there are some organizations who said, no, we will not go for it, because that will ruin actually our relationships. Fine, this is your choice.
I mean, if such a complaint is ruining a relation, if EU is becoming angry, etc., we have a bigger problem here. Like,
Here we go, exactly.
In terms of participation,
Absolutely.
in terms of, transparency and everything.
Absolutely.
Like, because all these EU people, the Commission, they're appointed people. They are there getting a salary to their job and then to serve us. Not us, but EU citizens. And then if there's a problem, of course, they are going to be challenged and they have to respond. So it's abuse of authority, like in a way, like abuse of power. Like, this is a wider problem. Maybe we can discuss in second after Roma summit. Because I found the subject for the next one, but maybe this is one another. Yeah.
You are absolutely right. And I can give you an example actually about the organizations dealing with disability. They have submitted really a large number of complaints, and none of them, and I don't want to discourage you, none of them were taken nicely, seriously, or I don't know how to say that. None of them. There was always a problem actually, like we don't agree actually with your arguments about the discrimination. We don't see the problem of the institutionalization of children, regardless Roma or non-Roma. There was always a problem, but they are not giving up. That's what I like very much. They are not giving up. They are just going ahead, and if it's necessary, they are going to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. Fine. If you don't agree with us, no problem, we can go to the European Court of Justice. But still, they are inviting Commission representatives to their events, and they are speaking there. So it doesn't mean that they ruined everything. Absolutely not. Just
as an expert who knows both sides of the table, do you see any chance or any way to democratize the relation between the EU bodies and the rest of the society? Like,
Because you think that it's not democratic today, or what's the problem? Okay, I understand your point. I personally believe that actually in our business, the number of complaints or the number of cases is very low. And that's one of the biggest problems. So we need to work actually more probably on the capacity as well, actually to submit more cases. I don't believe that it will, again, ruin the relationships. The disability organizations, they prove that it can be done in a very democratic and very professional way. So the question is in front of us, let's do it more, and let's see how we can improve things, because as soon as we have the evidences, then these evidences can be used against, let's say, national governments or local authorities and whoever else, to say, look guys, we have already an evidence that building a new segregated school, it's considered as discrimination. Don't do it. Simple as it is.
So just to sum up the discussion so far, please add if I miss anything. We are talking about EU money which is collected from the taxpayers.
Yeah.
So we are talking about public money. And we are talking about rules being applied not only to EU countries but also accession countries, which is the main documents governing the human rights agenda of the EU. So no fund can help or serve in a case where they further violate human rights and strengthen segregation and so on and so forth. And there are funds, some of them are misused, but we must make a separation between misuse of the funds and corruption.
Absolutely.
But corruption is a very major issue because it is stealing money from the money that can be spent otherwise in a better purpose. And there's no immunity in that, so all countries must follow this rule, but as a general rule, of course there are failures. And of course there are good sides of the EU fund, etc. But also there was an EU fund for Turkey for Roma only, Roma, it was the name of the project, 10 million euro.
Okay.
If you make a survey within Roma communities in Turkey, how did you benefit from this 10 million euro? You won't even hear that they know about it. Am I correct, Serkan? Nobody knows about it. Just a few people got very, nice salaries, and some Roma NGO leaders had their cars, office cars, like, driving to their office because they were part of this project. And of course, this is encouraging, discouraging, because we see that there's a corruption there, like, misuse, but in a corrupted way, a horrible way. When I was checking before we discuss all these things with you.
Yeah.
I see 4 categories of problems.
Okay.
You mentioned many of them, but let me maybe frame them again. One is, in some countries, the funds allocated to Roma is lower than the other funds in terms of percentage, of course, like, 10% of the Hungary Roma, but funds allocated to Roma is not 10%, maybe 1%, 2%. This is a problem with the EU funds and Roma, so they are below national average. Second, especially when it comes to Roma funds, a weaker accountability of the state agents. So some money to Roma, so what, etc. And I think it's also discussed unfavorable financial restrictions on NGOs dealing with Roma issues, like too many bureaucracy, too difficult, complicated application processes, and so on and so forth. And of course, strengthening further segregation and other violations through funds. Anything else that you want to add on this?
Let me help to understand a little bit actually the scope of these discussions, for example, of this. As friends who are sitting here, we have been involved in this discussion about the targeted versus mainstream approach. Like, do we need Roma-specific funding, or Roma should apply to the funding which is available actually for social inclusion, for, I don't know, labor market integration, and whatever else. And this discussion is still taking place, unfortunately, instead of doing the things like, I don't know, implementing whatever actions. So, because I think there is a very simple answer to this question. Of course, you need both. You need very direct funding, which would help in particular actually with the capacity building of Roma NGOs. So if you would ask me, I would allocate very specific funding for the capacity building of Roma NGOs, not for, like, I don't know, educational program for Roma. Educational program is for everybody. So the Roma, they should benefit from the very good quality of educational programs all over the country. But the main problem what we see is the capacity building. Roma NGOs, they are not benefiting from the EU funds because it's very bureaucratic, very complicated, and you can ask the questions, why is it? But probably today we will not solve this problem. But what we can do, we can argue for more money for the capacity building and community development, empowerment, and all of these things, which is really very rarely available.
But what shall we do then in a society like Turkey, where we have more than 70 countable minorities? So you create tension between different ethnic groups.
Look, I mean, if you think that it's fine to say, let's say, capacity building for all organizations who are representing, let's say, I don't know, minorities or whatever. So it's not only for the Roma minority NGOs, but for all minorities, it's also fine. But the point is that how you will reduce inequalities if the NGOs, organizations who are representing these communities, they are not able to apply for funding. How you would do that then? You need capacity building. You cannot expect from the public authorities that they will do the job just, of course they have a very important role. You are not running schools, right? You are not running social care services. It's the responsibility of the local authority. But at the same time, let's say the role of the Roma NGOs is very, very important, and they need money. Just how to, again, reinforce these capacities, this is a very important question.
Again, I'm asking to our colleagues, any question, please.
Hi, I'm Ivan from Civil Rights Defenders, Brussels office. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I would like to ask especially about hard law mechanisms. So, hard law mechanisms.
Hard law,
Sorry, it's hard power mechanisms rather.
Yeah, okay.
So, for example, are you aware of any case that reached the Constitutional Court or the Supreme Court that can be used as a legal precedent in Europe? Or, for example, are you aware of cases in the European Court of Justice that could set a precedent? Has the European Commission initiated infringement procedures against the state for that?
Okay.
And you mentioned, for example, the possibility of freezing funds. This is happening with Hungary, but we see that with Poland now it's being also discussed. how would be your assessment about that? Thanks.
Yeah, it's very good that you mentioned it, because Sinan, when you made the introduction, actually you mentioned this suspension of the structural funds in Hungary, which is a quite significant amount of money, and what is the, let's say, the mechanism behind, and what is the reason behind why Hungary is facing such difficulties. And you're absolutely right, actually Poland is almost the same. There are differences, but basically these two countries are facing
Gender-based.
yes, but the main issue actually for Hungary is the rule of law. Yeah, so this is the rule of law mechanism of what is happening, let's say, in Hungary, and the European Commission is asking, or was asking actually, the amendment of different legal instruments, and it's happening now actually, because by the end of November Hungary should submit all the amendments, and then the Commission will decide whether they will, let's say, let Hungary to use the structural funds or not. It's partly a political game, but there are it's a very good precedent actually that the rule of law mechanism can be used in the scope of EU funds as well. What would be good, and I don't know, maybe colleagues, you were sitting in the Fundamental Rights Forum last week, because the rule of law mechanism was discussed in the scope of human rights protection as well. Personally, I don't see too much in the rule of law mechanism about the human rights. So I would appreciate actually much more focus on human rights when it comes to the rule of law mechanism. When you see the rule of law reports published by the European Commission, the human rights issues are too small, if I can say it in a very polite way. Sometimes it's even missing. Because of the media pluralism and, let's say, the independence of the juridical system, or I don't know, whatever chapters they have, but there is no particular focus on human rights, which is, I think it's bad. And that's where we are failing. That's why, let's say, Hungary is not doing too much in the rule of law mechanism, actually, on the human rights field, because this is not so much part of the discussion, unfortunately. Of course, the gender stuff in Poland is, it's an important one, and that's is discussed, but Poland is facing difficulties not because of the gender stuff, it's because of the independence of the judicial system. So it's, again, another kind of mechanism. So coming back to your question of your precedents, actually, about the misuse of EU funds, from the human rights violation point of view, the situation is quite bad. It's really just a few cases we have, where actually ombudsman, equal treatment bodies, or the Commission, which I mentioned it to you, this Hungarian case, basically ruled against, let's say, the beneficiaries because of the human rights violations. I don't see any cases actually in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, for example, particularly focusing on misuse of EU funds. So we have not arrived yet to this stage that we are, let's say, able to argue in front of the European Court of Human Rights actually about the misuse of EU funds. Would be good. But we need to work actually a bit more on that. We need more capacities, more complaints, and then it might come. Yeah, so that's why I'm working actually on this kind of collection of cases, so at least actually to make some awareness raising that this issue is very valid, very much happening actually on the field. Okay? Yeah. So if you want to help me, then please help me.
A tire or something.
Okay, if you were in Turkey, we would have a different idea. Quite safe.
Our colleagues are expecting now.
Yeah. Any questions from our audience?
If not, then I just would like to ask to open one more area, if you don't mind. Yeah. So maybe your opinion would be very helpful. That Daniel, you mentioned actually that you have been applying for funds, but actually the competition was not really balanced because some of the big organizations were competing against you, so it was...
Sometimes NGOs like ourselves, we're competing... Yeah, I was saying that sometimes NGOs like ours, that we are national NGOs, we are competing with intergovernmental NGOs or international NGOs, which is not like equal run with them.
Yeah, but my question would be that do you see other reasons why, let's say, you applied for EU funds but you failed? right? So what happened? What was the reason? What do you think why you are failing, if you are failing, of course, why you are failing actually in your applications? There was one a lady there. Yeah.
I mean, if I can bring the case,
go ahead.
since I just started. I mean, first it's resources, human resources.
Okay.
Like, we as a national NGO, we are not that big to compete with intergovernmental NGOs or international NGOs.
Yeah.
Second one is also money. Like, they have a lot of more money than we have. So these are some of, let's say, beneficiaries that they have, so they can win against us, you know? So that's some of the reasons that make our application to fail in a way.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Hi to everyone. I am Giulietta Davoli, and I represent a network of Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian women organization in Kosovo. I wanted to say something in regard to applying to the funds, and what happened to us often is that we applied for funds either to EU or other international or even Kosovo institutions, but we failed, and with the same, with the maybe same projects, some bigger organizations run by majority by Albanians got the funds, and we have the impression that just because we are minority or community, representing a community or organization, somehow they don't trust us.
Okay.
Even though we are involved in the field of gender-based violence, and we are specialized in that field. We have a Roma woman, a very well-known Roma activist in Kosovo, Shpresa Agushi, but often bigger organizations run by majority directors and majority staff. They get to the funds and we simply are not given the chance to certain funds.
And what do you think, if I can ask, what's the reason that why they don't trust you? So can you just, let's say, operationalize, if I can say that, what does it mean they don't trust you?
Actually, when we apply for, especially for the bigger funds, our application is also with the application we submit all required documents proving that we are a serious organization. Nevertheless, when in competition there are also like a bigger organization and who apply for the rights of, in our case, for the rights of, with the projects addressing the rights of Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian women, often they get the funds, but we fail.
Okay, all right, okay. Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah. One more. So, actually, I just wanted to add that we have to work with certain organizations in order to prove our professionalism and to prove that we really are able to achieve the goals and the objectives of the projects, in order then to get maybe extra funds from certain organizations.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. I think you want, it's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
I can add 1 or 2 points to that,
sure.
Based on my experience most in Turkey. First of all, there are big companies operating under trust or foundation. Actually, they are profit-oriented organizations. They have huge human resource capacity. They are based in Austria, Italy, etc., etc. What they do is, if there's a big call, like 10 million euro, whatever, they recruit one local Roma NGO. They give some money to that NGO, but their whole application is actually profit-oriented. But because of their capacity and connections within the government and decision-making processes, they get the tender. So one of the solutions is to increase the number of Roma or other groups, representatives within the decision-making processes. Like, this is a major problem. Also, EU funds to NGOs is based on project management, not core fund. So if there's a project is 1.5 years, then you don't have resources for sustainability. Also, the conditions that they put in front of the NGOs when they apply for a fund is very heavy. So what you create is in countries like an NGO elite. Because if you have capacity, you get this tender, and then you get the next tender, and mid-sized, small-sized NGOs have no chance because they don't fulfill the requirement. So we've been lobbying before the EU for many years to change this project-based funding and shift to core funding. Because project-based, if you ask me, project-based funding is waste of money, like waste of time. You must give core fund to NGOs, and they know how to spend the money in their locality based on the local needs. Like, you cannot dictate from Brussels on what to spend and how to spend the money.
I think it's very good, actually, Sinan, that what you mentioned, because maybe we can translate it to some practicalities again. When it comes to the, let's say, this kind of cooperation between big NGOs or even profit-oriented companies and Roma NGOs, then there is always a problem actually with kind of ticking the box exercise that, okay, we have a Roma NGO in our project, so we fulfilled actually this kind of criteria, so we are okay. The solution should be something like actually Roma-related, or let's say when the Roma community, the target group is there, then actually the Roma NGOs, they have a leading role in this way. That's absolutely should be actually part of the advocacy. When you are running a kind of advocacy campaign, please figure it out actually how to advocate actually for this kind of Roma NGOs leading role in
not cosmetic partner, but
no, as a leading, Of course, it would require capacity. So let's not how to say shy away about this. That it would require strong capacities. But again, as we mentioned earlier, managing authorities, they have the full right actually to open capacity building projects. Like just simply to improve the capacity, to participate in trainings, to hire experts and whatever else. The other thing is that in some countries, they are using some specific instruments, and without going too much into these technical details, but some instruments which is like one big NGO is opening a call for proposal for small or medium-sized NGOs. That's what we call a global grant. Sorry for the jargon again. But the global grant is an instrument what member states, accession countries, and whoever, they can use it. So again, you are selecting one big NGO, one big organization, and this organization will open call for proposals for small and medium-sized NGOs, for capacity building, running projects, whatever else. And it works quite well. In the so-called populist countries, please don't put it in the minute, I mean, this kind of global grants, they are not working very well simply because the selection of this big NGO is very much corrupted. Unfortunately, these NGOs are more government-related NGOs. But in countries where actually this is still doable, maybe it would be a very good solution actually to use this global grant as an instrument for small and medium-sized NGOs.
Well, it also has its own problems because you are putting all the bureaucratic burden on an NGO and so on and so forth. So,
it's true.
I think the EU needs a discussion with NGOs on how to design funds and how to manage funds. This discussion, we demanded this several times by at the EU level. They think they know everything, but they don't know everything. But this discussion is needed. But surprisingly, we've been talking about almost 1.5 hours. So this is Balkans, and we love talking, but we have to wrap up. We have to finish, actually.
None of us finishing. But they are not sleeping, that's very good.
Yes, I'm throwing things you don't see.
Oh, that's all. Okay, now I understand why, so thank you.
To the people, yeah. I mean, what Andor is trying to tell us almost for 1.5 hours is very important because it's about how we can have an NGO, run an NGO, and how we do things.
Yeah.
And we are talking about, as we said in the beginning, we are talking about the money produced, generated by people.
Absolutely.
So I work, I pay tax, and this tax goes to somewhere, and somebody use it for some stupid purposes. We should stop this. I mean, because first we need this money, and second, I don't want to be abused. Like so it's a very justifiable demand.
Absolutely.
And Andor give us a very great framework on what to do, how to report abuses, etc., etc. But it's obvious that we need more negotiation with EU bodies. We need more talk, and maybe we need some dedicated sessions on EU funds and how to monitor these and so on and so forth. So I hope Andor's presentation and expertise gave you some new information or strengthened your information on the topic. And as he said, he's very open to communication. Actually, he's encouraging you to communicate with him, either asking how to do, what to do, or providing him information. So please use his capacity of long years in the field. As he said, he is the drafter of this guidelines. Like, who else you can find better to communicate. So if there's nobody from the audience who said, I will die if I don't make this contribution, and including you, Andor, maybe final remarks?
Thank you very much, Sinan. I forgot to mention one more important angle of this reporting. If at the national level or even in the Commission, people, they would tell you that, so now you're reporting cases which will slow down the implementation of the programs, so the money will be not so much available because you are basically blocking the EU funds. Please don't don't fall into this trap. This is not true. This is absolutely not true. And I can give you one simple example, the highway constructions. In all Eastern European countries, there was always a kind of whatever corruption about the highway constructions, right? Still interesting that the highways are kind of built. So it's not stopped. The corruption cases were more or less kind of investigated. There are still lots of corruptions, but they didn't stop building highways. So if they are saying that you are blocking the EU funds for Roma by reporting the cases, that is absolutely not true. You are not blocking, you are improving actually the situation much more. And thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Andor, very much. I will finish the session with one anecdote. Last year in Turkey, there was a workshop on equality body on women's rights.
Yeah.
Very nice. They are discussing everything, blah, blah, blah. But there was one minor problem. This meeting was implemented by EU money. There were almost 100 participants. There were only one woman in the... so I think this is a good example of how to misuse. So 99 men sat down and discussed women's rights issues with their man capacity. So we shouldn't let this happening because it's our money and we need this money. And thank you very much for your attention and contribution, also to Isabella, if she's still online, for her great contribution, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I will say one more thing. Thank you. Before you all go, thank you, Andor, thank you, Sinan, for great conversation and tips, and I hope we will use it and to think. We didn't include in our agenda coffee, but I think we all need coffee. So I will kindly ask you to come down to have a coffee, 15 minutes, and then come back, because we have also very interesting panel to finish about transitional justice and dealing with the past. Thank you.
It was so good, huh? I like that very much.
Greetings, we can start.
Get the headphones for translation because the discussion will be developed in Albanian. So whoever needs assistance, please let us know. Okay, super.
Thank you very much. I hope you do not feel too tired to continue. And we've had some very good panel discussions, and I'm very happy to be part of this. I'm Kushtrim Kolici from Integra organization. It's a human rights organization, human rights based, and works both locally and regionally. I am been invited here today to moderate one of the panels, the last panel for today, but of importance also, which is dealing with challenges of inclusion of Roma in state institutions, dealing with the past or reconciling the past. I have two important personalities here today, coming from two credible organizations which have contributed quite a lot in this field of dealing with the past, and we agreed that they would present themselves quickly and the organization they represent so that we can open the discussion initially with them and then with the audience. So I would ask from Fatmira to present herself and the organizations she represents, and then Besnik. Thank you. I am Fatmira Haliti. I'm a project manager of documenting cases of sexual violence during the war in Kosovo in the Kosovo Center for Rehabilitation of Victims of Torture, an organization established in 1999, immediately after the end of the war, with the mission of offering rehabilitation to survivors of this kind of trauma and violence. The organization has worked for years. It has been involved later on in including victims of sexual violence in the laws of Kosovo. We have worked to document such cases during the war, and it's one of the first projects of its nature in Kosovo and beyond in documenting crimes of sexual violence during the war. Also, our organization is quite committed to promote human rights for all ethnicities in Kosovo, and the main objective here is to ensure equal treatment of all citizens of Kosovo. Besnik, please. Greetings to all. I'm Besnik Becha, part of the Fund for Humanitarian Rights in Kosovo. As Kushtrim said, we are an organization which focus on transitional justice and facing the past. It has functioned as since 1997, initially working to document violence, and after the end of the war, also to work on documenting cases of deaths, murder, and disappearances during the war. We have also worked on issues of war crimes and political persecution based on ethnical background, and we have worked to monitor all of these issues and document all these issues, and we are giving focus now to symbolic forms of reparations for victims in order to find some satisfaction for the victims. Fatmira mentioned comprehensiveness, and I discussed this with Sarah. This term causes me not to feel so good when we talk about the Roma community, and not just talking about previous processes or transitional justice. Is this term of comprehensive inclusion does not include the Roma community, even though there are many initiatives in Kosovo, especially in the recent years. I see this as a concern in the work that we do, but in my personal beliefs. This element is something that worries me. So I would like to know your opinion, according to your opinion, and the work that you do and what you have created as individuals, as professionals in the field. How much do you think the Roma community has been involved, included in the process of facing the past or reconciling the past, and with other levels of including cultural aspects, society in general, but with a focus on reconciling the past? Yes, it is of concern, because in reality it's not what we have as our objective. Our objective is to comprehensively include everyone, to deal with issues of inclusion of communities, and we particularly notice that the Roma community is at the biggest disadvantage in terms of its inclusion in decision making and various different processes. So I would focus on cases that we take into consideration, because Besnik will talk from his point of view. When we started to work to include the victims of sexual violence during the war period, we had difficulties because until 2014 the victims of sexual violence during the war were not included in any law dealing with reparations or providing services and treatment. So what we wanted first to do is to recognize their status as victims. In 2014, the law included these provisions, and until 2017, a commission was not set up to deal with these issues. So the law was adopted in 2014, but then it took 3 years for a structure to be set up. So particularly with the institutions, when this commission was set up to recognize the status of victims of sexual violence, because the law does not categorize them according to nationality or ethnicity, you had a commission of 9 members, and maybe it's our fault. All 9 members are Albanian, from the majority community. So the secretariat, which handles requests for review, again Albanian, all 3 of them. So we have 7 regional offices to consider applications and to deliver them to the commission. The representatives of all the regional offices are from the Albanian community. Even the 4 organizations licensed by the government to work on these matters are organizations mostly handling issues of the majority community. So there wasn't any mechanism, commission in the secretariat or the regional offices that was part of the minority community, and in particular the Roma community, which is was a community that suffered from sexual violence. On the other side, they are not represented in these structures set up by the government, which would represent their interest in a better way rather than someone else or majority community organizations or representatives. Yes, it is clear, I understand that. Besnik, this has become a sort of a norm, a pattern, the non-inclusion of the Roma community in these processes. This has become so ordinary that no one even talks about it. So I think that reconciling the past, the basic principle is to have inclusion of everyone, a comprehensive inclusion. So if you don't include everyone, all the victims, all the communities, the process will not be successful. So it should be a bottom-up approach to represent the victims accordingly. So yes, we are used to having a public consultation just to tick the box, but this is not comprehensive inclusion. Comprehensive inclusion is when you have victims, persons members of that community are part of the drafting of a law and are part of the process of accountability. So we have seen that for a very long time, or since the conclusion of the war in Kosovo, we have noticed that the inclusion of the communities has stopped there at a phase of consultation. So the communities were never really made part of the decision-making process and of monitoring the actual results of any particular action. Are they delivering on what they are supposed to? This has brought it into our focus of introducing laws to communities that are included in the process. Or to provide you some statistics, we talked earlier today how important data is. From the war in Kosovo, there are more than 13,000 people that have lost their life, or those that are still missing, 1,600. This is according to the database of the the Fund for Human Rights, and there are close to 300 from the Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian community, 276 in general, and 250 of them are civilians. So civilians that should have been protected by laws. Someone has to be accountable for these crimes, and reparations have to be offered to their families, be it for victims or those that have suffered from the war. So as a result of this lack of comprehensive inclusion, we will talk maybe later about the law on the different categories of participants in war, but we saw in the database that 97 people were executed after the 20th of June, after the conclusion of the war. And after this date, these reparations are not offered to their families. So a large number of people that disappeared or were killed after 20th of June 1999, when they are considered by their commission as civil victims, if this was done after that date, the families cannot claim reparations. So the moment when they find information or they identify the remains of their disappeared family member, their status changes, and so their right to reparation is not allowed by the Kosovo government because of that legal clause. This is an issue I'd like to highlight because most of the people that were executed, killed after the 20th of June are from the Roma, Ashkali, Egyptian community and Serb community. And because these communities were not part of the development of the law, we have come to a situation that we have a law that excludes such victims or their families. You worked a lot on documenting war crimes and civil victims of the war. How difficult is it to document crimes that have happened, particularly against the Roma community? And what is the truth in relation to these victims? Because very little is said about Roma victims, civilian victims. How difficult was it to document this because of the political circumstances, disappearances, or fleeing of community members? As I said before, the fund started immediately after the war to document each person that was killed or disappeared as a result of the war, and we have a time frame of 1st of February 98 to end of October 2000. Well, this is the time frame because the direct confrontational war ended in June 99, but a lot of victims were killed or disappeared after the war, which is related directly to the effects of the war. So I can say I'm a new person in the organization, but there is a group of persons in the organization that have worked in the field since then. But what characterizes the group of victims from the Roma, Egyptian and Ashkali communities is a stigmatization which still exists in Kosovo. That there is a belief amongst the majority community that there were a lot of collaborators with the Serbian forces amongst members of these communities. So when investigators meet with the family members, many people hesitate to tell the truth or to provide information or to even talk in general to start with. So a lot of investigations had to be done indirectly. Sometimes we have documentation, statements from family members and witnesses that were there in these cases. Focus was given also to documents coming from the Hague Tribunal in order to confirm data and information, because when we do documentation, we don't just document the names and numbers, but we have a database which provides more information when the person was actually killed or disappeared, to provide additional facts from the proceedings of court hearings, if anyone was indicted or found guilty for a certain case, and to provide a brief history for each individual to know what were the circumstances to their leading to their death or disappearance. Thank you. So the case is mentioned by Besnik. There is a hesitation of the Roma citizen to some extent to cooperate more. That they need an additional push and additional energy to work with organizations such as yours, because your organization focuses on documenting victims of sexual violence during the war. What is the actual situation in documenting such cases when it comes to the Roma community? The documenting of cases of sexual violence did not exist until 2019 because it's quite specific, very sensitive. You cannot include personal information, identity, cannot be made public, so there wasn't any mechanism which dealt with these issues, mechanisms of reconciling with the past. So in 2019, with the help of the Swiss embassy, we started a project to document cases of sexual violence during the war in Kosovo. So the first years were very challenging for us to reach other communities, non-majority communities, including victims from the Roma community, because the survivors of such violence, sexual violence, are the most stigmatized and sensitive part of our society, because all of the victims, irrespective of their community, are stigmatized and continue to be so. So in the last few years, we've done a lot of campaigns, group meetings, and meetings in the community to fight the stigma of the communities, to be closer to them and to provide our support. Implementing other activities as part of the organization, because we have other projects dealing with returnees and repatriated individuals. We have always used the opportunity to inform them of the mandate of our organization, so that they know they have an open door where they can report such cases, because it is very difficult to identify such cases. Even if you know that they are a victim, it's difficult to approach them. So you need to create some preconditions for them to voluntarily come and ask for help. As part of the documentation of cases of sexual violence during the war in Kosovo, in the last 3 years we have documented 900 cases. We have data about 1,000 cases, but they're still being processed. From the 900 cases, about 4% are from non-majority and 2% from the Roma community. So 22 from this 900 are from the Roma community. So I can say that the continuous meetings in the community, the campaigns have had an effect of increasing the number of those reporting these crimes. Last year we've had 11 cases reported, this year 22, so we have increased the number of reported cases within the Roma community. Obviously there is need to raise awareness, to further communicate with them, but we are trying to be close to them, to tell them that we exist, we are there to support them and for them to approach us. I would make a difference here with the commission, the state commission, because their database does not have information about non-majority communities. In communication with the state commission, they said that there are from other communities that their status has been recognized, but they don't have exact numbers of these 22 cases that we have documented are cases handled by NGOs, our organization, and another organization working in Jakova that have worked on these cases. From these 22 cases, all have applied for their status to be recognized. Some of them have already been issued with that status of victims. Some are still pending, or others have been refused and a court case has been initiated. So from this 2%, this gives us an indication that there are more cases like that amongst this community in various municipalities and villages, but because of the lack of communication and direct campaigns to raise awareness, maybe they don't know at all, they're not aware that they have this legal possibility to get this status as a victim. The Fund for Humanitarian Rights monitors also court proceedings, and I wanted to know, in your opinion, how have these cases of Roma community been considered either in Kosovo or in Serbia, which are related to the war? As I said before, one of the programs of the fund is monitoring the war crime tribunals, and how this is done is that throughout the year all the proceedings, like in the Hague Tribunal or the hybrid courts managed by UNMIK or EULEX, and now from the local courts, are consolidated into annual reports which we publish. We offer recommendations for institutions and support where we try to identify what were the shortcomings of these trials and hearings. A number of the people that were tried or those that were heard as victims were from the Roma, Ashkalian Egyptian. We have case Drenica 1 and case of Jemshid Krasniqi, which has been who has been sentenced. So these are court cases that were done in Kosovo, were heard in Kosovo, and people were sentenced. I can mention the process of Anton Leka from Jakova municipality. His case was heard in Belgrade. He was sentenced to 13 years in jail, and most of his victims that in a way criminal justice was served. The victims were mostly Roma, Egyptian, and Ashkali individuals from Jakova. But the common denominator in these cases is the lack of reparations. That even when you have final verdicts, someone is found guilty and sentenced, the victims do not receive any reparations. We don't have such cases. The Kosovo legislation in 2015 introduced a law for compensating victims of crimes. We know that laws are not retroactively applicable. So people that were tried and sentenced before 2015, these are cases that cannot be considered for compensation, apart from them seeking compensation through a civil suit, which can last for years and be very difficult to be successful. But from 2015 to 2022, again, even though there is a law, there is no case of someone getting compensation through this legal mechanism. On the other side, we have about 100,000 being provided to defendants, so for legal fees. So there is a disconnect between what the law should be about, of serving victims rather than defendants or culprits, and it's the other way around, the reality, and this is the disconnect between justice. So even though people were sent to jail, were sentenced, the victims were not offered any compensation. I would open another issue with people invited here. On the law of recognizing status of victims of sexual violence, based on the work that we do as organizations working on human rights, it is in a sense exclusionary because it covers victims of those horrendous crimes up to June 99, but there were cases beyond this date from the Roma and other minority communities, including Serb communities. So the lawmakers referred to a date like the agreement of Kumanovo, which is officially the ending of the war in Kosovo. So how do you see this? Is anything being done to exclude these or change these legal provisions that are exclusionary and do not cover victims beyond June 1999? As I see, there is no willingness, at least from lawmakers, to change these provisions. It is true what you say, the law is quite exclusionary for non-majority communities. It is a law that has only included the period of the war for those who can be recognized with that status. And you said as you said, after the conclusion of war, most of those suffering from such crimes are non-majority community members like Roma, Egyptian, Serb, and others, but the law has determined it in such a way. So we advocated for this to be extended to October 2000 or 2001, but at the time, in 2014, this was not even considered because they didn't even want to include these kind of victims in the law to start with. We continue our advocacy work with members of parliament, and in the last 2 or 3 years we were even more committed to advocate with members of parliament to amend the law and to change these legal provisions. As you said, It is true that there is lack of political willingness to make such changes. As NGOs, because this advocacy work is not done in isolation, we try to do it with as many partners as possible. One of the challenges is changes in the government, frequent changes in the government. It has happened often that we met with groups of parliament, the Women's Caucus in parliament. Then very frequently we had elections, we had a new government, a new composition of the parliament. Obviously we continue to work with members of parliament. We had a working group meeting, so our proposal was not rejected, but they were asking for proof. Why are we seeking this period to be extended beyond June 20th? As part of civil society, who has been part of discussions in all the strategic documents for transitional justice, we have always proved the case why these victims have to be included. Now we are waiting for another meeting with members of parliament, and this is something that we are going to insist on. In addition to this, we were part of discussions of the working groups on the strategy, government strategy for transitional justice, where we gave comments in writing and in public debates, where we proposed that the period of war to include the end of 2000 as a period. And in the drafts, which is being in public consultation, our comments there were also to include that same period for those victims of sexual violence. So if we achieve in the strategy document to keep this definition, then our task will be easier to make the changes in the law. Because I'm part of that working group for the national strategy on transitional justice, so I think the working group was quite open to these proposals. So the current date included in the draft is, but our fear is that when this document goes to the government, where it needs to be adopted, we need to see if they are making any changes to it. I would like to open the discussion to receive comments, criticisms, suggestions. From Roma, Kosovo, Driton. To tell you the truth, I feel a bit disappointed how the whole process of registering such victims is proceeding. We are in 2022. We are still talking about an extension of the period, knowing full well that there were victims of such crimes even beyond June 99. I see that there is insufficient inclusion of the Roma community in this registration, and I can tell you that you could find Roma individuals that can work on this in this regard. So I would suggest for you to think of creating mechanisms that will allow people to feel free and make such a registration or be involved in the process. So, and you should have members of the Roma community, not one but many, because the experience in every sector that we have worked is that the inclusion of the Roma community, Roma staff, working with their own community is necessary. This is the first issue. The question is, what were your attempts, and if you did, what was your experience if you tried to include the Roma community in this process in both cases of registering or identifying victims of sexual violence, but also of war crimes in general? And I also want to make a question. Obviously, I cannot expect good news, but is there any sort of communication between NGOs? Because we know that they are non-government organizations and they need to be concrete and active in their work. Is there communication between your NGOs and NGOs in Serbia in relation to looking into these lists of victims from both sides? Because I'm sure there are lists being developed on that side of the border. Thank you. We have two questions and a comment. From a comment from my perspective, to have better access to the community is better to have staff from within the community in order to build the trust between institutions and the community. And then I saw that there are two questions, one for you and one for the other. I would ask you to be brief and concise in order for us to allow for other questions and comments. As in relation to our efforts to include non-majority communities, as I said, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a number of campaigns, awareness-raising campaigns, including the Roma community. We've had meetings during the pandemic through Zoom, online meetings, but also physical meetings. Also in some municipalities, we worked with a number of organizations. We briefed them on our project and invited them to cooperate with us to refer cases in order for us to further process these cases. So the communication we've had as part of our organization, we've had a number of projects. 2 of them are related to sexual violence based on gender, where we have members of non-majority community, and through UNHCR we've organized group meetings or individual meetings, so we try to inform them about the organization, what are their legal opportunities to file such cases, and we've had cases of survivors coming to report sexual violence, and then they were offered treatment through our organization and other organizations. The question about other organizations, we have good communication, a good network of organizations, including those from Serbia, and when we've had cases of sexual violence that was referred by an organization from Serbia, and this was a case of someone experiencing sexual violence after 20th of June. We told them that there is a legal obstacle to this, even though we offered the opportunity to handle their case, to record their case, but they refused because of this limitation in the law and would rather wait for changes to be done. So this year we've had 2 regional meetings with all organizations working in our field in the region, so the cooperation is quite good. Thank you for your comment. It is appropriate, as Krushim mentioned, that when we work with these communities, to work with members of the communities in them, or have them part of our structures. when we deal with issues of victims of war and those killed and disappeared, difficulty is always data or communicating directly with a family member, or we find ways of through mediators to meet, or we try to persuade them by giving them background information, what is the importance of documenting these cases. As for cooperating with organizations in Serbia, documenting civil victims of war and those disappeared, this work was started by Natasha Kandic, and since 2011 we function as a separate organization in Kosovo, but documenting civil victims and those disappeared is done in close coordination with a fund which is based in Belgrade. The cooperation with the fund there is also making civil claims in the court system for compensation. There are more than 50 civil claims filed in courts in Serbia that were done in cooperation with us, asking reparations, requiring reparations for more than 180 people. As a successful case, we have the case of the Bogujevci family, but we are working in this regard with the Fund for Humanitarian Rights in Belgrade. In addition to Serbia, we work closely with organizations in Bosnia and in Croatia with the RECOM platform, which has established a mechanism to document crimes, which unfortunately is not being supported by the institutions so far, but we are continuing to build it up and to support it. We have cooperation with specific organizations. We have exhibition with the organization SENSE in Croatia, dedicated to the manner in which data was documented before the Hague Tribunal. So it is an exhibition of a number of monitors documenting crimes and how facts were brought before the Hague Tribunal. Thank you. Anyone else would like to comment? And Rodi on the back.
Colleagues' previous comment, I try to be also calm and professional, but actually really very hard to be now. So I have several questions and also concerns, maybe comments as well. So I'm also working a bit of on leadership positions and also of building memories of Romani people. So I'm much more focusing in social science level anyway, doesn't matter. So, but basically I'm really conflicted with your presentations. I have different issues and dilemmas. First of all, you mentioned, some of you, of course, that you have a hard access to Romani communities, that they don't want to share the memories and experiences and so on and so on. How do you expect that they will share the memories and them past with you for free, actually? Because honestly, you are as an NGO, you're working with them, you're taking their memories, you're taking them all knowledge, you're building projects on them, and you don't involving, not only not involving, but actually, yes, let's say in a nice way, that you are not involving in them in your project. You don't giving them visibility, representations of their memories. And I'm very critical in this sense. In my I never use word gypsy, because for me it's a slur. So actually what I see now, you are building memories on the gypsies and not on Romani people, not of the Romani victims. I'm very critical in this as well. And I think we don't need support, we need leadership in this case. So this is my very critical comments as well, but if I should, or if I must pose a question like, how many Romani experts, how many researchers, how many NGOs did you involve into your project to building Romani memories?
Po, do të kuptojmë pyetjen, ha? Okay, cool.
I would say documentation process is not to use others. It's a process as a satisfaction for victims. Like if the after generation of these victims don't know what happens or don't have their names of their previous family members in documentation process, into documented letters, documented books, after a few years, it's a lack of contribution in today's days. So what we are trying to do is not just to use the victims, but it's to kind of to document their losses and to give a satisfaction to them that when you document the losses, others kind of know their losses, and kind of as a victim you feel better that people are recognizing your losses, and kind of it's a kind of a recognizing it's a justice of recognition, like just I know your losses because I documented them, and then I can take future steps what we can do with your losses. So it's the first step that we can do in order to contribute with other steps. It's the first step. We have to document it, and then to continue maybe with reparation, as we mentioned.
I just really want to reflect. I'm sorry to take this, but this is my issue actually. Yes, there is a recognition from your side, but also I'm missing the representation of the others as well. And also, I believe that without representation, you cannot really talk about reparation.
Okay, po nduket Rudi, tani Sara.
Rudi then Sara. Hi, Rudin. We call him Rudi. Sorry.
As a Roma community member, actually, in this topic, always, because professionally I also work on the topics related to dealing with the past, and I have to say, when it comes to Kosovo, dealing with the past and it still remains a taboo for the communities. Roma have suffered from both sides in the conflict, and actually they don't dare to speak about it. But when the processes are designed, they are designed for the two conflicting parties, for the Serbs and for the Albanians. There is no room for the third narrative, which is not fitting into these two major narratives. And I think that this is the core of the problem. So when the processes were designed, they were designed for the two major groups, and not for a narrative which doesn't fit into all. I mean, we have spoken about the victims of sexual violence. And one of the key issues that also Driton actually mentioned is trust. So first, there should be trust and safe environment created for the victims to come forward. But there has been no efforts actually to do this. And I will use a case of Shehriye Balay. This is a Roma woman that was raped, and she actually went in front of the court in Belgrade in 2013, and then actually she died in despair in 2019 in very high poverty, without even getting the status of the victim in Kosovo. So she didn't even get recognition from the state. And what we have seen is actually specific victims of this category were declared national heroes. But the Roma woman died in despair, actually, and she did not even get the recognition and the reparation. So I would say a recommendation is to make an active outreach to the community, create safe environment for the community members, for the victims to come forward and tell their stories. But to do all this, it is necessary to make the legal amendments. Kushtrim already said the law is discriminatory. It stops in June 99. We have Roma victims which actually are victims beyond June 99. And to have these victims accommodated into the legal structure, you must make the legal amendments. And also, Besnik said rightly, there is two conflicting laws, a law on missing persons and a law on war values. Family which has a missing person beyond June 99 gets certain reparations. At the moment when this person is found, the family loses the right for reparations because it's not a civilian victim anymore. So the legal amendments are definitely necessary, and I would suggest strongly to the NGOs working on this topic to advocate and accommodate the rights of all. And Fatmire said it rightly, we don't have sufficient data. Sometimes you need data, sometimes you just need value-based approach. So even if there is one victim, you should actually, based on the values, you should accommodate that victim in the legislation. You don't need, I don't know, like documented hundreds and hundreds of the victims. And also then a comment towards the documentation. Besnik said that the HLC has done a documentation of the civilian victims and all the victims in the conflict. What I know is that documenting a Roma victim is 3 times more difficult than documenting an Albanian or a Serb victim or a victim of another community. Another problem in this regard is that a lot of Roma left. They moved not only to the region, but they moved to the west. And then they are not ready to come back and talk and give their data and then be part of the whole documentation process. So yes, it is true 20 years beyond, but when we talk about dealing with the past in the Roma, we are actually at the beginning of the process. And I think that all of us should work together to accommodate this. Thank you.
It's very hard to talk after Rudy. He took all my points, but I think we both agree on everything. So I would just compliment to that. I would just maybe compliment to something else. We are in Kosovo. We're in a crossroads now because the new government now, but the government in the last 1.5 years started 3 processes. Establishing the Institute for Documenting War Crimes. We have the working group for drafting the national strategy for transitional justice, and we have amendments to the law on missing persons. As everybody mentioned here, only the law on missing persons defines provided time frame for the victims who were missing up to the end of 2000, so after June 1999, not the others. Now, the government, in the new law for establishing this institute, has included that people, victims after the June 1999 until 2000 they are not victims of the war, but as a consequence of the war, same as the missing persons. So it's a legal road opening for changes in law on veterans where people should be recognized as victims, including victims of sexual crimes. But I think it's a crucial point for civil society organizations. I'm pointing to because we have 2 of you who are main actors in this field to find the ways and also to do joint cooperation with other human rights organizations who work with and for Roma, to find the ways how to improve the inclusion of Roma in these processes right now, and we should watch this as a very beginning, since we are still kind of in the beginning with all these processes, but also to be frankly and I would say open that wasn't happening until now. So that is true. We haven't done a lot. And I like to see how things can be improved rather than looking behind. So we know the problems, let's see and orientate the future and really use the situation. One thing is, and I agree with Driton and Rudy, is we cannot do this without involvement of Roma. But it's on the government, on people who are pushing the processes, to also this trust, create the trust, and to eliminate the fear of retribution if people come to talk about the stories. To Dejo, we will talk, it's great that you are here also tomorrow. I would like to explain what both organizations do a bit in in the details. It's not only collecting stories and memories, but it's a very thorough methodological way of documenting war crimes, backed with a number of sources. I know for sure the Humanitarian Law Center, it's called Kosovo Memory Book. Each case has at least 8 additional sources of documentations, photos, newspapers. It's a really comprehensive database. Same, I think the KRSAT, I didn't see that, but I know that we were talking that you started like that, to build a comprehensive documentation. So it's not only memories that, or how collecting stories. The very important thing is that we are documenting the truth. Don't forget that in Kosovo, none of the government, none UNMIC or EU missions, nobody did important and truthful documenting of truth. We still live in the narratives of different narratives around us. And this is 2 sources that are very, very much important to build the truth and tell the truth. This information that both organizations collect are also used for judicial procedures, so it's also judicial facts. They become judicial facts. So it's a circle of things and the processes that we need to consider when we talk to that. For me, again, it's very important, and when I made this, and I talked to all of you and to Rudy, and I consulted a number of people about this session, it was also reparations, very important, because we know that people are excluded. Some people are excluded because of a date, but we still have, as Besnik mentioned, a number of people who can, but are not receiving reparations. So what can we do about that also? So something like this. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Talk in Albanian. Thank you for your contribution. I wanted to relate to the educational system and books and texts in the history books. Even there is a lot of prejudice, and when Roma victims of the Holocaust, the last war, were mentioned, they were generalized or in a way blaming the Roma and Sinti population for what had happened. So what I want to ask, does there exist a mechanism to monitor how history is being told in the schools, in the history books, and what we can do as students, as organizations, that the history is not told in such a way, because it is my impression that people are quite limited in the information they get, that apart from Albanian victims, there are no other victims from the last war. So I thank you for this opportunity to discuss matters, but I don't know if my questions were clear or not, but this is a concern that I have. It is quite a big problem that you have initiated. I'm not aware that there is an organization monitoring this aspect of education in Kosovo or educational text. Integra has had some small initiatives, but there was no organization so there was a lot of fascism, extremism, and bias against others, glorifying, in our case, the Albanians or others. In the work we do as an organization and advocacy, from 2013 we have a project and we have continuous lectures in schools. The first part is presentation of facts about victims, court cases about related to the war, and also the importance of reconciling the past. It has started as a project, and its role was to persuade the state institutions that citizens or people have forgotten what has happened, and often when we ask them how many victims of the war do we have, most of them don't know. Or when they have lectures with Albanian students, is the attitude of victimization. If you have lectures with the Serbian community, then you see the same stance of being considered as victims or victimhood. But what is a success is the textbook on citizenship education or social education reflects a lot of, in a very good way, what has happened in Kosovo. So you have chapters there based on the book of Memories of Kosovo, so they have been presented quite well with extensive research, so students can at least know how many victims we have from each community, what has happened with tribunals, what legal mechanisms functioned in Kosovo, what has worked and what has not. We have a last question and we have to conclude with that. I have a comment. Marigona Chabiu from YHR. To relate to Agon's questions on scanning the education system, it is true, as Kushtrim said, there is no general scanning of textbooks and education materials, but we as YHR, working in Kosovo and in 4 other countries of the region, we have scanned history books or textbooks of schools, and we have analyzed how these historical events are represented when there is talk of wars and the narratives of other communities and nations. So from the analysis which we produced in 2018, the narrative of the war in Kosovo is mono-ethnic, very militaristic. There is a lot of hyperbole, not based on the facts and information collected by the humanitarian fund, and mostly because Kosovo does not have a database of victims, and in this regard the state has failed, and its civil society organizations taking a more active role to fill this gap. So there are activists which consider that the work that we do is done just merely for a project so that we can implement a project. But all of the work that has been done so far, and to build in Kosovo a memory, a remembrance of voices that were never heard before in the documentation of events and the legal processes, is a result of the work of activists, of organizations from civil society. So respectfully, I can say that 100% of the work in documenting, in reconciliation, in all aspects of facing the past, has been done by civil society organization, and the rhetoric that we work only for grants or funds is a rhetoric we hear from politicians very often, which don't really like what we're doing, don't really like to see us working, because the work we do goes against their narrative and in a way puts into question their authority or the points of view they want to push forward. Obviously, there is a lot of work to be done, a lot of room for improvement, so I don't want to have a defensive approach or stance, but I would like to thank all the activists that have worked so far in this field from all the communities. We have those from the Roma community that have made attempts to extend this sphere of collective remembrance, which is monopolized, unfortunately, from these military figures, these male heroes, and there is a missing part of the women perspective of children, of LGBT community, of minority communities. So we are doing our best to move away from this position and to have a greater solidarity amongst one another to move forward with these processes. Just to also work more with the communities so that they represent themselves better, but be part of national programs and also those at the municipal level, so that their suffering is recognized and their status as victims to be recognized, and to be able to get reparations and their stories to be heard, like the stories of everyone else. I just wanted to reiterate this, and I hope all the organizations in the panel, you've done incredible work, and we are very grateful for that. But we need to continue working to ensure that all the victims receive the respect they deserve. Thank you very much to Marigona, to all participants. Wish you a successful, fruitful day tomorrow, because we will continue tomorrow with the rest of the topics. Thank you, Kustrem.
For the guests that are staying hotel, dinner is tonight, nothing organized, but from 6:30 it's on. I mean, you can freely go. We didn't organize, sorry, for anything, so yes. And the other guests who are not sleeping here are more than welcome to come to join for dinner.